The whispering hit before the badge failed. You know that moment when the office feels off, not chaotic, not loud, off like the silence right after someone drops a mug and everyone waits to see if it shattered. That was the entire fourth floor when I walked in. I passed Derek from procurement and he couldn't meet my eyes. Chelsea Vargas, the queen of passive-aggressive birthday cards, actually winced. That woman once told a pregnant intern she was glowing with indigestion and even she looked sorry for me. Then came the badge reader. I tapped it once, nothing. Tapped it again. Red light. Third time's the charm. Nope. Still red. I tried to laugh it off like it was a system glitch. It had been tweaking badge access all week, but the security guy didn't even pretend to pick up the phone. Just said you might want to check with HR. Like he already knew. Like everyone already knew. And they did. Oh, they absolutely did. I get to HR, and there it is. My face pinned to their glass wall like I'm a suspect in some corporate manhunt. Right below the words "needs a lesson" written in thick red expo marker. I stood there staring at it, feeling the air go still in my lungs. Not because I was scared, but because it was so absurd it bypassed rage and landed squarely in disbelief. Then I heard it. That voice I'd mentally rehearsed, murdering 100 times in the shower. Trevor Moss leaning against the door frame like a dollar store Bond villain, sipping his protein shake like this was all part of his big alpha plan. Just a little accountability, he said with a shrug like he was announcing a fire drill. You've been a little sloppy with your tone lately. Tone? That's what this was about. Not the 3 vendor inconsistencies I flagged last week. Not the $14,000 budget plug I manually corrected when the system misread an invoice. No. Tone. I didn't say please enough when I asked him to stop marking expenses as miscellaneous. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a stapler or demand a meeting. I just looked him dead in the eyes, then turned to HR, whose mouths were suddenly full of invisible sandwiches, and said, "Noted." Walked to my desk, grabbed my plant, my backup charger, and the mug that said, "I'm silently correcting your math." Left the coffee, though. Let him see what it feels like to lose something essential. 'Cause here's the thing, and I say this with zero melodrama, I was essential. Not in the badge swipey morning huddle sense, but in the glue between the gears late night kind of way. The kind of essential they don't realize until invoices go unpaid, compliance reports go stale, and someone asks where the hell the F12.3 form is. And real quick, if you've made it this far, take a second and tap subscribe or drop a like. Seriously, means a lot to the team putting these stories together. Plus, 90% of you are just lurking and you know you want to know what happens next. Anyway, back to the carnage. I stepped into the elevator without looking back. Trevor thought he won. Thought I'd go crying to some lawyer or blast a Facebook post titled, "The Day I Got Corporate Swatted." But that's not how this works. Not with someone like me. I'd already mapped every point of failure in that building, not out of malice, out of necessity. See, when you've spent years being told you're too meticulous, too controlling, too direct, you learn to protect yourself with receipts. I didn't leave empty-handed. I left with something better. Triggers, quiet systems I'd built not to sabotage, but to survive. And now that Trevor had ripped out the linchpin, those systems were about to start asking questions no one at Cardinal Logistics could answer. The first, why the bank just emailed the CFO to say all outgoing payments were on hold pending dual authorization, reinstated by someone named Paige. But that's tomorrow's fire. For now, I'm sitting in my car, AC on full blast against the dry Denver heat, my plant in the passenger seat like a tiny green witness. I check my phone. No missed calls. Good. Let them feel the quiet. Let them wonder. I didn't even make it out of the Denver office parking lot before the first email went out. Subject line F12.3 activation notice. Sent to the CFO, Vanessa Holt. She's the only one in that building I ever respected, mostly because she didn't pretend to understand the back-end accounting protocols. She just nodded, signed what needed signing, and stayed out of my way. The body of the email was 10 words exactly. Per policy deactivation triggered the dual lock. See Doc 12.3. No emojis, no salutation, just enough to make her drop her sugar-free vanilla latte and open the compliance binder. Email to BCC to legal for kicks. Went to Elliot Shaw, our liaison at Alpine Trust, the firm's primary business bank. Hi, Elliot. Please confirm execution of transfer freeze per standing agreement. Triggered today at 11:08 a.m. via credentials deactivation. Will advise reinstatement authority. I could practically hear him saying, "Oh no," in that tight little voice of his. Elliot's nice but twitchy. Doesn't like surprises, especially not surprises that freeze 7 figures in payroll and vendor disbursements the same week the audit review starts. Then I called my accountant, canceled my direct deposit like I was just skipping brunch. "Are we finally doing it?" she asked. "Yep," I said. "Light the candle." She laughed, actually laughed and said, "I'll route everything to the holding account. Let me know when you want these SEPIRA stuff moved." And Paige, proud of you. That was the moment it really clicked. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't a tantrum. This was years of pressure finding the nearest release valve. I wasn't trying to burn the place down. I just stopped holding up the roof. If the beams cracked after that, not my problem. In the rear view, I watched the office park shrink behind me like a dying idea. Beige walls, frosted glass, the illusion of control. They built that company like a tower of Jenga blocks, flashy on the outside, hollow in the middle, and balanced entirely on the hope that no one would sneeze. Well, I didn't sneeze. I just stepped back. Most people don't know what FV12.3 even is. Hell, Trevor never asked. It's a clause buried in the compliance continuity plan I updated last October when the board decided to digitize the audit trails. States clearly if a Tier 2 infrastructure officer's credentials are revoked without formal documentation or exit protocol, all external transfers will be locked until dual approval is verified by compliance and legal. Trevor didn't read it. Of course he didn't. He was too busy tagging me on LinkedIn posts about disruptive synergy and pushing that idiotic slogan. We run lean, we run smart, we run first. First to what, Trevor? Bankruptcy. Back at the office, that little red expo marker might as well have been a lit fuse, because here's what happens next. The automatic vendor payment scripts hit a wall. The ACH batch scheduled for 3 p.m. gets rejected. Authorization mismatch. The contract to airbase flags missing signatures on 3 renewed agreements I refused to e-sign because Trevor wanted to just push it through. Legal gets a ping from the system asking why infrastructure privileges were revoked mid-cycle. And Vanessa. She's going to call Trevor into that glass-walled war room and say, "What the hell did you do?" But I won't hear any of that. I'll be walking down aisle 6 at the Target on Colorado Boulevard with a cart full of candles I'll never light and an $8 bottle of Pinot that tastes like victory and middle fingers. I don't need to be in the building to be in control. All I had to do was leave and make sure every weak point I used to patch stayed unpatched. Let the hemorrhaging begin. Let the replaceable cog show them what happens when she finally steps off the gear. F12.3 wasn't about revenge. It was a warning label they ignored. Now they'll get to read it line by line, one failed transfer at a time. It started with a bounce. Monday at 2:17 p.m., the auto payment to Halcyon Courier Services hit a wall. Error code 4189, authorization mismatch. Nothing flashy, no fireworks. Just a silent thud in the accounts payable system like the first domino toppling on a polished conference room table. Maya, one of the junior analysts, stared at the screen blinking, then tried to manually override it. System said no. She messaged Owen Bradley, mid-tier finance guy with a beard like a squirrel's nest and a fondness for combat brewed in his bathtub. He said, "Weird, mine stuck too," and sent a screenshot of a payment to Brightline Transport marked frozen verification failure. By 3 p.m., a quiet panic had taken hold of the finance bullpen. The group Slack channel lit up with polite chaos. ! Anyone else seeing delays on batch 6? Can't push payment to TDM. System wants Paige's token. Do we have backup routing authority for Intel wires? Owen tried to call me. Bless his heart. I didn't answer, of course. Phone was face down on my kitchen table next to a bowl of the cereal I'd had for lunch like a middle school burnout. I was watching a documentary on shipwrecks and sorting laundry, which felt cosmically appropriate. Back in the office, the questions were stacking faster than the unpaid invoices. And Trevor. Trevor was lounging in his corner office, scrolling through LinkedIn like a man who thought he'd won a prize. When Maya knocked on his glass, her face pale, he actually rolled his eyes. "She'll be back," he said with a chuckle. "They always come back when the severance runs out. She's replaceable. Run it through again. Run it through again." That was his solution to everything except, of course, reading policy documents or learning how the financial systems were tied to back-end access tokens. He thought accounts payable worked like a microwave. Punch in the code, get your hot pocket. He never saw the wires underneath, never saw the firewall protocols or the way I'd structured the fail-safe triggers after the Jenkins incident last year. But Vanessa did, or at least she sensed them. At 4:03 p.m., she got her first alert from Alpine Trust. Urgent multiple outbound transfers flagged for dual auth lock clause F12.3. Please confirm override authority. She didn't reply right away. She opened the internal policy drive, searched for F12.3, found it, and sat completely still. Meanwhile, the vendor calls started. First, it was Halcyon Courier. Hey, did our payment go through? Then, a passive-aggressive email from Brightline. We were expecting funds by EOD today. Let us know if there's been a hiccup. By 5 p.m., Owen was sweating. Maya looked like she was going to cry. Trevor was still pretending to be unbothered, telling Vanessa that I flounced and screwed up some billing macros on my way out. She didn't respond. She was watching the numbers stall. Every minute I wasn't in that office, the wheels slowed another inch. The illusion was crumbling. Trevor didn't know it yet, but he was sitting on a ghost ship, pretending the sails still worked while the hull filled with water. I'd spent years being just the quiet one, the one who liked spreadsheets too much, the one they left out of happy hour invites but looped in when things went sideways, the one who'd been passed over for promotions because you're already so good where you are. So I stayed where I was, watched, built. Every mistake they buried, I quietly tracked. Every system they duct taped, I learned to brace. I didn't fix things for recognition. I fixed them because I knew what it would cost if I didn't. And now they were learning the price of cutting the parachute cord before landing, not with a bang, not with a scream, with a locked transfer screen, with a vendor voicemail saying, "This isn't like you," with a CFO whispering, "What exactly did we break?" into a dead phone line. And me? I was sipping orange juice from a wine glass because petty victories deserve presentation, watching the inbox swell with panic, wondering how long it would take before they realized. She didn't just leave, she let go. Vanessa didn't even make it to her desk. She came in through the south stairwell. She always used the front elevator, always, unless something was wrong. Her heels clipped sharp against the tile, lips pressed into a line that could saw wood. One of the interns offered her a coffee. She didn't blink, just walked straight through the bullpen like she was aiming a missile. Trevor was mid-brag to some poor visiting client. Something about restructuring inefficiencies and lean pivoting when she opened the conference room door and said, "Inside. Now." He chuckled at first, gave a little nod to the client. Did that dad walk into the room like it was all beneath him? Until Vanessa slammed the door behind them hard enough to rattle the glass. "I just got off the phone with Elliot from Alpine," she said. No warm-up, no preamble. Bank has frozen all outgoing payments over $10,000. That includes payroll processing, logistics disbursements, and 3 escrow link transfers tied to the compliance audit. Care to explain? Trevor blinked. What? She held up her phone like it was a court summons. Paige's credentials were deactivated at 11:08 a.m. Per clause F12.3, her removal without process triggers a dual auth lockdown on all outbound funds. You knew that, right? Silence. Trevor opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Vanessa stared him down like he was a bug under a microscope. "Did you file a formal warning before revoking her access?" He squirmed. "It was just a joke. Jesus. HR put her photo up as a motivational thing. Needs a lesson. You know how we do. Morale stuff." Morale. Her voice dropped 2 octaves. "You hung her face on a wall like a wanted poster. You humiliated the person who reconciled every dollar that went through this building for the past 5 years, and you did it without process." She overreacted. "No," Vanessa said. "You underprepared." She pulled a folder from her bag and dropped it on the table. Inside, printouts of emails, Slack receipts, Paige's policy update logs, the signed implementation of Clause F12.3, a memo she'd written 3 months prior titled Continuity Safeguards in the Event of Unauthorized Credential Revocation. Trevor pawed through it like he was searching for a lifeline. She set this up." "Yes," Vanessa said, "after your last attempt to restructure her out of a bonus cycle." He tried to laugh again. It came out as a wheeze. "So what? This is revenge." Vanessa's look could have frozen the sun. "No, Trevor, this is insurance, sabotage proofing. She didn't take us down, you did. All she did was stop holding the ceiling up." Outside, the finance bullpen had gone uncomfortably quiet. Owen sat frozen in front of his screen. Maya was on her third coffee and shaking like a chihuahua. The intern kept peeking toward the conference room like she was expecting smoke to pour out. Inside, Vanessa dropped the next bomb. "I need you to understand something," she said, her tone shifting from fire to frost. Paige didn't send one angry email, she didn't scream, she didn't demand an exit package, she just walked away. And within an hour, half our financial infrastructure locked itself down. That is not an accident, that is someone who planned for exactly this. Trevor looked up, pale now. "Can we reverse it?" She didn't answer. Just walked to the door, opened it, and said, "Legal's waiting upstairs. Get your documentation in order if you have any." He followed her out like a kicked dog. Color drained from his face. The man who'd once compared himself to a wartime general was suddenly mumbling about jokes and tone and team culture. No one met his eyes, no one spoke, they all knew. And me, I was still silent. I hadn't said a word since I left. No text, no tweet, no ominous voicemail or dramatic press release. Just 2 emails and a system that did exactly what I told it to do. Because real control doesn't need noise. It just waits quietly until the right fool pulls the wrong thread, and then everything starts to come undone. It took less than 48 hours for the cracks to show. By Wednesday morning, HR was in full damage control mode. Phones glued to ears, printers screaming, toner streaks on foreheads like they'd been marked by the ghost of due process past. Brooke Pemberton, the HR director who once gave me a "just smile more" mug after a tense budget review, was now begging IT to resurrect a paper trail that never existed. Trevor had yanked my credentials without so much as an HRIS update. No write-up, no internal memo, no official reason for departure form. Just vibes and ego. But HR can't file vibes and the bank doesn't honor ego. By noon, the vendor calls started rolling in like waves crashing against a crumbling dock. "Hey, just checking. Did our invoice get processed last Friday?" "Hi, our shipment's being held at port. Your wire never cleared. We've paused further service delivery until funds arrive." They tried to shift blame, of course. Said it was a temporary system update. But vendors aren't stupid. When you've paid someone on the first of every month like clockwork for years, and suddenly your money's frozen with no notice, you start sniffing for rot. Then came the real blow. A $2.3 million order from Northpoint Analytics, one of the firm's oldest and largest clients, got flagged during back-end verification. Funds hadn't cleared. The auto-approval I used to manually reinforce, gone. The cross-check spreadsheet I maintained by hand every Thursday, no longer updating. Northpoint's head of procurement emailed the executive team personally. "We're postponing deployment until financial verification is restored. This isn't the first delay we've seen this quarter." Translation: "We don't trust you anymore." Trevor, now sweating through his pale blue shirt like a human water feature, tried to blame the junior analysts. "They're still learning," he told Vanessa, who had long since stopped blinking during his monologues. "We need to stop over-engineering this stuff. Paige just made it too complicated." "Complicated?" she said, voice sharp enough to shave steel. "You mean functional?" The real humiliation came at 3:41 p.m. when the compliance officer, Sloan Becker, stepped into the finance pit like a funeral director. Sloan didn't talk much. She didn't need to. Her walk alone said, "Try me in 6 languages." She carried a thin black binder labeled Page S Protocols and a legal pad already filled with red ink notes. "I'm conducting a spot review," she announced. "Page's Q1 audit uncovered irregular overrides. Need to trace them." Trevor stammered. "That's all handled. Legacy stuff." She was always a bit paranoid with controls. Sloan looked at him the way you look at someone who just asked if HTML is a flavor of soup. "Did you authorize these overrides?" she asked. Trevor hesitated. "Some of them, for efficiency." Sloan flipped the binder to page 7. These entries bypassed internal thresholds. No 2-key confirmation, no compliance timestamp. These aren't efficiency measures, they're breaches. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "The system flagged them," Sloan continued. But Paige left notations in the logs. Her final audit trail is extremely thorough. Dated, indexed, documented. The room was quiet enough to hear Maya's stomach growl. No one laughed. "And just to clarify," Sloan said, "you did remove her without going through HR protocol." "She was insubordinate," Trevor muttered. "Toxic." Her tone, toxic. Sloan blinked slowly. She outlined a breach you personally approved, documented it, and routed the report through Vanessa's office. You signed off on it. Trevor's soul visibly exited his body. I'd warned them. Every time I'd quietly highlighted a mismatch, or flagged a repeat violation, or slipped a post-it to legal marked urgent doc override. I wasn't being difficult. I was protecting the framework that kept their reputation intact. They just thought I was nagging. Now, without me, they were piloting a 747 with a cartoon map and a broken altimeter, wondering why the system screamed. And the systems I'd carefully bolstered, maintained, and customized, they weren't failing. They were functioning exactly as intended once you removed the human patch that had kept the bad decisions from detonating. That patch was gone. Now the machine was eating itself, slow, loud, and in full view of every vendor, client, and employee who'd ever wondered what I actually did all day. Turns out, I was the difference between forward and faceplant. The thing about clauses is no one reads them until they're already on fire. Late Thursday afternoon, legal finally got involved. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Sloan's audit triggered a full-scale compliance review, and someone upstairs realized they didn't actually know what my role had been contractually classified as. They knew what my title was: Senior Account Specialist. Neat and vague, the kind of title that sounds important but is easy to ignore. But the function behind that title, that lived in the fine print. So they dug, and there it was, plain as the red ink on Trevor's quarterly reviews, buried in Addendum 6 of my employment agreement, in a section no one had touched since the last security audit. Clause F12.3, employee designated as Tier 2 critical infrastructure. Removal of credentials without documented cause or formal HR process shall trigger mandatory freeze of high-value transfers, require dual auth override, and alert third-party custodians. I'd written the clause myself. Well, drafted it, technically. After Trevor tried to restructure me out of my quarterly retention bonus last year and rerouted one of my vendor audits to a summer intern, I walked straight to legal with my receipts. I didn't scream, I didn't threaten, I simply showed them the risk profile of letting someone like me not be covered by safeguard protections. A week later, they added the clause. Trevor initialed it. He signed the damn thing, but he never read it. Now, in the legal conference room, usually reserved for mergers and trademark disputes, Vanessa stood with one hand on the back of a chair, looking like she was about to commit corporate homicide. Trevor was seated, clammy and pink around the collar, trying to act like this was all just a learning moment. Across from him, Erin Whitaker, Associate GC, black blazer, steel-rimmed glasses, scrolled through my PDF like she was reading the terms of his execution. This contract categorizes her as critical, she said, tapping the screen. Not just finance, not just infrastructure. Critical infrastructure that triggers federal compliance standards. Her removal without process is an internal control breach under Section 108 of the Financial Data Handling Act. Trevor blinked, hands flat on the table. What does that mean? Vanessa didn't look away from him when she said it. It means we've committed a breach, and it's documented, and it's traceable. And if we don't self-report before audit, the fines start at $250,000. Silence. Then Erin added, almost offhand, also, your signature's right here. Page 9. Trevor leaned in as if seeing it would undo it, his name right next to the clause with a timestamp. The ink might as well have screamed, "You did this." He looked up, cheeks drained of all color. She set this up. No, Vanessa corrected. She protected us. You just didn't understand what she was protecting us from. The room fell quiet. Not that kind of corporate quiet where people pretend not to check their phones. No, this was that deep, paralyzing stillness that only shows up when a man realizes the floor beneath him was never solid. That it was a trap door, and someone, him, just pulled the wrong lever. I didn't need to be in the room for this part. I'd already lived it once. The first time Trevor tried to push me out, I'd played defense, quietly moved my audit logs to a shadow folder, documented every misstep, every override, every risk flagged and ignored. I'd watched how legal froze when I showed them how exposed we were, how many doors Trevor had left unlocked out of arrogance and speed. They were smart enough to listen back then, and I was smart enough not to trust it would be the last time. So I made sure the next time, this time when he acted without warning, he'd trip a wire that didn't just snap back. It would snap up into systems, into banks, into policies he'd never read, but happily signed. I didn't write Clause F12.3 to get revenge. I wrote it so I wouldn't have to. That's the real twist, isn't it? Everyone thinks the threat comes from the one who yells the loudest, but it's not. It's the one who smiles while writing policy updates, who files paperwork at 7:14 p.m. with exact wording and quietly CCs legal for transparency. The one who watches, waits, leaves nothing undocumented. By the time they realize what's happened, you haven't just won. You've already moved on. The email hit my inbox at 8:03 a.m. Friday. Subject line, exploring a possibility. I was on my second cup of coffee, wearing a hoodie older than most interns, sitting on my balcony while a neighbor's dog tried to bark the Denver sun out of existence. I almost didn't open it right away. Figured it was another recruiter pitch for some underpaid, overhyped startup offering equity and a casual dress code as if either one could pay a mortgage. But then I saw the domain, Meridian Logistics. The competitor, the one that had just won the government contract my company had spent 6 months throwing all its resources at. A $48 million federal supply chain upgrade for emergency logistics. Exactly the kind of deal we'd been pinning the next 2 quarters on. They'd beat us by a hair. At least that's what Trevor told the board. Turns out the margin wasn't hair thin. It was compliance wide. I opened the email. Paige, we heard you might be available. I won't waste your time. We reviewed your contributions to the compliance framework over at Cardinal Logistics. Your clause work and audit architecture. Elegant, surgical, effective. Our CFO would like to meet. The offer is real and immediate. Warmly, Kyle Hendricks, COO, Meridian Logistics. It took me exactly 4 minutes to respond. Mr. Hendricks, thank you. Let's talk. Paige. No flair, no resume attachment, no need to dance. When someone opens with elegant and surgical about your policy work, you're already seated at the table. By noon, we were on a video call. Their general counsel was already present. The CFO nodded through my answers like he was mentally replacing half his department. I didn't ask for a signing bonus. Didn't need to. They offered it anyway. More than I made in 2 years at Cardinal, a new title, a private compliance sandbox, team building budget. But the best part, they didn't want me to fix anything. They wanted me to teach them how not to need fixing. That same afternoon back at Cardinal, a very different email was being drafted. Vanessa was in her office with the blinds shut, typing like her fingers were on fire. The subject line of her message to legal, HR, and the executive board read, Restoration Plan Proposal, Page S. The first sentence, in order to pass audit and avoid regulatory penalties, we will require Paige's assistance for at least 30 days. This is not optional. Trevor had already been gently escorted out of financial decisions. His name no longer appeared on any routing tables, and IT was quietly dismantling his system admin credentials. Maya told me later that he tried to float the idea of me returning to finish out the quarter for continuity's sake, like I was a teenager covering a last-minute babysitting gig. Vanessa didn't even respond to him. She just kept writing. Given that Paige left without breach, and in fact protected the company from significant liability, our tone must be appropriately deferential. This is a request for assistance, not a rehire. She attached a draft letter. It was dense, polite, full of executive phrases like unfortunate misunderstanding and opportunity to realign. But it screamed one thing loud and clear. Please come back and stop the bleeding. I never replied. Didn't need to, because at exactly 5:17 p.m. after signing the Meridian contract, I shut my laptop and poured a glass of bourbon. Not celebration, not revenge. Closure. They wanted a consultant. Someone who'd walk back in and pretend nothing had happened, apply a bandage, and nod through thin apologies from men who couldn't spell compliance without a cheat sheet. But I don't repair machines that ignored the warnings. I build new ones. And Meridian, they weren't asking me to fix anything broken. They were handing me a clean blueprint and the pen. It wasn't about pay. It wasn't about titles. It was about walking into a room where nobody's pretending they know more than they do. And no one pins your photo to a wall and calls it accountability. Final phase set. No fanfare, just quiet satisfaction and the sound of old doors slamming shut behind me. The emergency board meeting was called for 7 a.m. sharp, because nothing says this is fine, like dragging a group of half-awake executives into a walnut-paneled conference room before the cleaning crew's even done with the vacuuming. Vanessa sat at the head of the table, notepad closed, phone silenced, a single manila folder in front of her like it was a detonator. Her blazer was navy, no jewelry, no makeup. She didn't need armor, she had facts. The rest of the board trickled in slowly, the air thick with expensive cologne and quiet dread. Murmurs about cash flow timing issues and vendor reconciliation delays hung in the air like mildew. Trevor arrived last. He still hadn't shaved. He tried for casual, leaning against the wall, sipping from a Cardinal-branded coffee tumbler like this was just another quarterly check-in. Vanessa didn't look at him once. She opened the folder and spoke without preamble. Our financial system is frozen. All external transfers over $10,000 are currently blocked. 2 federal vendors have flagged us for non-payment. One of them has begun the process of suspending their contract. Dead silence. Clause F12.3 was triggered Monday morning when Paige's credentials were deactivated without HR documentation. The clause requires dual auth override for high-value disbursements. We failed to satisfy those overrides. Compliance considers this a breach of internal control. One of the board members, Preston Mahoney, a former banker with liver spots and a terrifying Rolex, leaned forward. "You're telling me this clause shut down the company?" Vanessa shook her head. "Trevor shut down the company. The clause prevented him from doing further damage." All heads turned. Trevor opened his mouth. Vanessa cut him off. "Please, step out, Trevor." He looked around the table, eyes darting like a trapped animal. This was a misunderstanding. HR was on board. It wasn't even formal." "Step out." He left, but slowly, like if he moved slow enough, he'd still be important. When the door clicked shut, Vanessa exhaled and leaned forward. "She was protecting us," she said quietly. "From this. From exactly this." The clause was designed after a failed demotion attempt, one that Trevor initiated. Legal reviewed it, he signed it, it was in effect. The legal counsel nodded from the corner. "It's ironclad. It automatically notifies our banking custodians we're in breach. We'll need to self-report and initiate mitigation or face fines and potential blacklisting on federal contracts." Another board member, Claire Donovan, sharp as a guillotine and 3 times as fast, tilted her head. "Has Paige responded?" "No," Vanessa said. "We sent a consulting offer yesterday. Competitive rate, immediate re-access to systems. She didn't reply." "Should we follow up?" Vanessa hesitated, then said, "I don't think she will." The silence that followed was the kind that bruises, the kind that stretches across glass tables and conference phones and makes even the HVAC vent seem too loud. Because everyone in that room knew what Paige had done. She didn't leak anything. She didn't lash out. She didn't call a lawyer or post a Twitter thread or lawyer up for headlines. She simply stopped. Stopped absorbing the negligence. Stopped covering for incompetence. Stopped propping up the rusted gears of a machine too arrogant to know it was already falling apart. And when she stopped, it all collapsed in slow motion. They'd spent years underestimating her, treating her like a spreadsheet with legs, overlooking her in meetings, ignoring her audit flags, calling her tense when she insisted on protocol, and rigid when she refused to fudge numbers. And now she was gone. The only person who could unfreeze their systems, reverse the damage, and make them whole again wouldn't even return their calls. That's not sabotage, that's absence. Weaponized and louder than any outburst could have ever been. The silence around her was now the loudest sound in the room, and it was deafening. Trevor walked back to his office like a man trying to make a scene feel normal. The meeting was over. The board had spoken in tight, clipped phrases. Vanessa hadn't even looked at him during the final 5 minutes. Legal had said they'd circle back after reviewing internal liability scenarios, a phrase that in corporate might as well mean, go clean out your desk while it still has your name on it. But Trevor still held on to hope, because men like him always do. Hope that charm would carry the day, that someone somewhere in the chain of command would pull him aside and say, "Tough room, huh?" That this was all temporary. And he opened his office door. The lights were off, motionless, like the room itself had given up on him. His monitor was already on, screen glowing in the pale blue of our internal OS. But the wallpaper, the one he changed to a photo of himself holding a fake award at last year's holiday party, was gone. In its place, a simple black and white screen. Critical infrastructure override. Revoked. The font was standard. Sans serif, polite, but it screamed. He stepped toward the keyboard and pressed a key. Nothing. Moved the mouse. Still nothing. The computer didn't freeze. It locked him out like it knew, like it had been waiting. He turned just in time to see Vanessa standing in the doorway. No folder, no clipboard, just her. Calm. "She didn't sabotage us," she said. "She protected us from you." Trevor opened his mouth to argue. She cut him off. "You never understood what she was protecting. Not really. You thought it was about balance sheets and vendor codes, but she was holding the architecture together. The protocols, the trust, the credibility. You were swinging a hammer through a glass house and wondering why the cold was getting in." She stepped aside. Security waited at the end of the hall. He didn't fight, just walked toward the elevator, a ghost of himself clutching a coffee tumbler that now looked ridiculous in his hand. Meanwhile, I arrived at Meridian's HQ 50 minutes early. The lobby smelled like actual espresso, not burned desperation. My badge worked on the first swipe. No red light, just a satisfying ding and a green glow. Welcome. A woman named Morgan from operations walked me to my new desk. I had a view of the Rockies. The chair was ergonomic and quiet. No squeaky backrest like the one Trevor never approved a replacement for. My monitor was already set up with my preferred settings. 2 screens, vertical alignment, a note on the desk. "Welcome aboard. We've been waiting." By 9 a.m., I was in a glass conference room with the CFO, the head of compliance, and the COO. They smiled. "We read the clause you built," the COO said. "Elegant. You didn't just protect a company, you engineered resilience. We want that here." The CFO nodded. "Would you be open to teaching our compliance team how you structured it? Build something permanent. Long term." I sipped my coffee. Better beans, smoother cup, my kind of room. I set the mug down and smiled. "Sure," I said. "Let's call the session, 'How Not to Be the Lesson.'" And just like that, the ones who thought I was disposable finally learned the truth. I was never just the infrastructure. I was the storm shelter they tore down for better airflow. And when the sky cracked open, I didn't slam the door, I just walked out and let the wind do the rest. Thanks for watching, you cubicle warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own.